Welcome to Anatomy of a Strategy podcast. This is Carlos Pacheco.
This is Tara Hunt, and today
we're talking to our good friend J. Kelly Hoey, who's one of our longtime friends, a accomplished author,
speaker, consultant. She's built accelerators. She's had a fantastic law career. Welcome to Anatomy of a Strategy, Kelly.
It is awesome to be here, and wish I was in the studio with you too, because it's always a pleasure to hang out with you.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, we miss you a lot. It hasn't been that long, but it seems like forever.
Yes.
We really wanted to have you come on the show because you approach your career as well as your clients' problems in a very, well, I would say unique, but very rational way.
A human way.
Yeah, very human way. Can you talk a little bit about your background for anybody who doesn't already follow you and know you?
Well, I guess the rational approach on all of this probably comes from being Canadian, a Virgo, and my first career being a lawyer. And I started, I would say my career started in 1991 in Toronto in a big firm. And I mention that because it's, kind of focus on it because it is foundational for me. I had a very much a expectation with my career of, get a degree, get another degree, get another profession, get the basic degree, get a professional degree, get a job, move up the corporate ladder kind of mentality, thinking about things, where I expected my career to go, corner office and a secretary kind of idea. And the importance of the legal career in terms of where I am now is, that is, from when I was practicing, that's a relationship-driven business. The attorney advertising rules when I was practicing, no billboards and chasing ambulances. This was all a word of mouth, your excellence in what you did in your craft, and continually building your skill set. And then how are you helping other people solve their problems? And what were you doing to pay attention to their needs and help them? And where were the ways you were having touch points in between engagements that you were staying top of mind with them for the next time they had a big problem or challenge? So that's sort of the foundation of everything that I've done when I sort of think about how you do business development, how you approach, keeping people around you who keep you top of mind for the next opportunity. The next big kind of piece in my career was when I went to make a career change, and that was back in 2001, 2002. So after sort of 11 years or so of practicing law, kind of had that, this is not quite doing it for me. And I really wanted to make a really easy, on paper, career change, move from one side of the law firm ledger, being the revenue generator, the attorney, to move to the other side to be on management. And I quickly realized that those were opportunities that required a word of mouth network, and I didn't have the network. I had a great, amazing network of lawyers and investment bankers and everything else associated with the type of law I was practicing. But I didn't have a depth and diversity in strength for the type of career change I wanted to make. And that was one of those kind of like, oh my God moments, making sure that now I don't ever put myself in that position again. But I spent, a good solid 18 months building that network so that I could make the career change. Fortunately, I'd worked at a couple of firms. I'd had people who had made those changes before. So I had a contact, but I knew I needed to make that bigger, network of connections. And then I was in law firm management for, I think now, was it 5.5 years before, spinning out into other opportunities that really came from the community around me, the network, knowing who I was and what my abilities were, which again, grounded back in that being a lawyer, which might be shocking to people. And not that we think of lawyers as great networkers, but in the way I think about it, I think that foundation was really key to where I am today.
That is a really interesting lesson. I don't think a lot of people think about lawyers and especially professional services industries as like doing the whole word of mouth network building as being core to their business. But it's changing now, right? There's a little bit of a movement on that more and more. I think maybe with social media that more and more lawyers are getting online.
Yeah, it feels like they're they're taking these opportunities to be a little bit more loud and a little bit more out there, right? The platforms.
Yeah, well, it's so funny when I think of professional services firms and I think about the struggle that they have, and put lawyers in that with, let's just use the M word, marketing. And where I see them, in my opinion, going wrong is they seem to be focusing on this marketing aspect rather than what is sort of a core tenet of the profession, which was, the customer service, the client service. What does the client need? What can help them in their business? And rather than being, I'm going to say, sort of like going back, and maybe it was because of the attorney advertising rules at the time. I haven't looked at them recently, so I can't, judge and say what they are now. But really focusing on that and realizing that is your strength and using that in and on the new platforms that we have today, rather than, advertising pages in magazines and billboards that, put your phone number and tell people how great you are. Show them how great you are. Don't tell them. And so it's kind of funny for me that even though you have more lawyers adopting new venues to connect with their client base, they're using them in that kind of in your face, old school advertising way.
Yeah, the pushing the messages. Actually, it just occurred to me when you were talking, I was like, I can't remember, I know there were effective events and things for people to do before the internet, but like how would you build that network? How would you build that word of mouth in that pre-social media era?
I mean, it's probably the way I think about how people build a network. You start from where you are and you start with who you are already interacting with.
Right.
All of us have a network. All of us have, if you're hanging out a shingle to start your own business, chances are you've already got people who know you and love you. All right, how can you give them more reasons to know and love you? So, back in the day before, you could post on Facebook or LinkedIn, a recent article, you might have emailed it, or you might have gone really old school with that American Bar Association or Law Society of Upper Canada article that you wrote, and you might have sent a photocopy to someone, or maybe you had a print edition that you sent to them in the mail, telling them why you thought it was useful for them. You paid attention to what was going on in their life, and it might not have been because of a Google alert. It might be because, you were reading the Globe and Mail or the Wall Street Journal, and you noted something about their company or something about their industry, and you sort of said, hey, did you see this? Or, hey, congratulations. You used to have a book that had people's birthdays in it rather than waiting for Facebook to spit it in your face. But, at the end of the day, you really focused on, all right, what is the task or the project that I'm doing for this particular person to help them? And how can I do it exceptionally well so that they're going to tell somebody else, oh, you've got that problem? Call my person. They can solve it for you. They can solve your problem. So, like I said, I really go back to that. And I sort of think it's funny where we sort of talk so much now on what are the things people need to do to get word of mouth. And I'm like, go back to the old rules still apply. We just have new platforms to apply them on.
Yeah, well, when you were talking about forwarding the article, like clipping it out and mailing it, I'm thinking about like LinkedIn has the sales manager has a feature where you can basically follow people that you're interested in connecting with, and it will send you like news alerts about them so that you can open those conversations. It's very much the same thing, just digitally. So, and it's interesting that you say that a lot of, these firms, and then we see this with even just companies, even beyond the service industry, missing this very, very powerful tool, which is listening. When it comes to social, it really is, they really think about it more of a broadcast than a listening platform. Talk a little bit, because I found it's really interesting for me because when I met you, like, you personally were moving away from law or you had moved away from law, and you're moving deeply into the startup tech space. Like, how was that transition? Where did that come from? And now you have the social tools. What did you apply from your previous life to this one?
Well, we're going to have a long talk on listening, because you're absolutely right. I mean, that's one of those things where we have, whether it's networking or whether it comes with the strategies that people need to build community. We may all have the same tools. We all may all, by appearances, have the same types of people, but how they interact with us is unique. And the benefit of all these different inputs, I want to say, that we have now, whether it's in person or online, is we can watch and observe unique engagements with us, and we can therefore decide and design our actions based on that information. So, blanket kind of generic advice, kind of doesn't apply. The career change and how I got involved, because it goes back to when I was still in law firm management, and how I got involved in the startup community, and why then am I co-founding a startup accelerator and getting involved in all that, because none of that relates to what I was doing when I was practicing law, and none of it relates to what I was doing when I was in law firm management. But it is everything to do with how people knew of my skill set and what I was capable of. So when within law firm management, I made a switch from attorney training and development into marketing, and in particular to building an alumni program for a global law firm. And when I was tasked with that responsibility, it was basically build an alumni program. There was sort of one in place, but had fallen kind of, it lapsed and had needed to be rejuvenated. And when I was handed the responsibility, I had no staff and no budget.
Huh.
Yeah, exactly. It's our most important thing. It's our people. Yeah. Anyway, go forth with no staff and no budget. So I had to approach it differently. And I really needed to create a model where it was community driven, and the engagement and enthusiasm to participate came from the community. It couldn't be top down, because I had no carrot for a top down model. I didn't have the ability to throw cocktail parties and do all those things that people thought they needed for alumni programs, because, no budget. So how and where was there an engaged community where the community's activities were driving, the value, and you needed a very, very low overhead, to put it in kind of law terms and business terms. And that's where I turned to and saw this network that had grown out of Goldman Sachs, and it was called 85 Broads. And it was an informal alumni group for women, business women. And when it had started, it had been slowly focused on women who had been on Wall Street at Goldman Sachs. That's where the name came from their old address and headquarters. And by the time I got involved, it was a global network of about 35,000 women globally.
Wow.
And I saw and had known about this network through friends of mine, knowing that it was truly community driven. The enthusiasm of the community had spurred the growth of the network, because originally it had just been the idea for a cocktail party. And then the internet came along, and the founder, Janet Hansen, grew it from there. And I got really involved in that network in a selfish way. A selfish way that benefited 85 Broads. I became very active as a member because I needed to understand what made it tick, so that I could step back from that and say, okay, based on this information, what are my takeaways for designing, my plan to revive this law firm's alumni program. The upside was that I did come up with the strategic plan for this law firm, and I made myself highly visible within this new community. As a result of that, the founder asked me to become the network's first president, which I did for a year. In being involved and highly visible in that community, I interacted with a lot, sort of a larger and broader spectrum of people than I had previously. And people knew what I was capable of. Again, go back to that word of mouth network. And so the Startup Accelerator, that whole idea and the really delving into the startup community when you and I really met, Tara, was two other women had an idea for this Startup Accelerator. And what they did was they described, in talking to other people about it, what they did in describing their idea was they also described a skill set that they needed for a third co-founder. And every time they described this skill set, other people would say to them, you need to talk to Kelly. You need to talk to Kelly. Hey, you know who you need to talk to? So by the time they'd gotten to me, it was like they'd had numerous conversations. So this again goes back to, my days as a lawyer. Does your reputation precede you? What is that reputation you're building? The benefit now is if you're, a small town, fill in the blank, we'll just say small town lawyer somewhere, because of the internet, your reputation of the kind of work and who you are can travel much further and farther than it ever did before. But you got to start with the grounding of what are you doing? What are the actions you're taking with that particular client or project piece of work in front of you, that there's something worthy of talking about.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because I think about all of the times that we've actually had a lead come out of nowhere, or, like somebody just drops in my slides into my inbox DMs. Yeah. And is like, I've heard your name repeated X number of times. I've been told I should talk to you. It's, I try to usually get the names of the people who have recommended me, but sometimes it's just like, I've just heard it so many times in so many places that the person can't even recall. And that's stuff that I can't record. In a lot of, companies, the same thing happens, right? Is they're focused on all of these metrics and analytics and click-throughs and that sort of thing. And that this sort of interesting network of real people having real conversations that are not trackable, thank goodness, in a lot of ways, who are carrying probably the most authentic, real messages. So we have a million lessons on how to spread word of mouth online. But, what are your core lessons? And this sort of leads us into Build Your Dream Network on getting that word of mouth spread offline.
Yeah, again, all I can kind of keep hearkening back on is, who are you doing the work for, and are you empowering them and giving them reason to talk about you? And let's go back to its core and when it started, and when we still liked Facebook. That the idea was you could connect with your friends and you could share information. So, you no longer had to go to, a Zagat's guide to find a restaurant. You could just ask your friends. And so what are you doing with the person in front of you? What do you do? How are you empowering that client so that when somebody else says, I need, your name is the one they recommend?
Yeah.
And that's the offline piece. And it doesn't, for me, because that's the whole thing for me with social networks. Whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter, Facebook, for me, they're just another room, so to speak, where we as humans interact. So LinkedIn to me very much feels like a legal bar association that I used to be a member of. Facebook, again, back when we really liked it, that was more where I used to hang out with friends and family. And then Twitter for me has always been the cocktail party. I am the same person. But when you think about it, because people always think about, oh, the personal brand and what they're doing, I'm like, well, our brand is the same, but our brand doesn't behave the same in all of those human interactions. And so rather than thinking about the technology, it's like, who and how are those humans interacting in that particular room, whether it's online or offline? And what is the version of myself I need to bring to this room? So, an online example is, the information I share on LinkedIn is related to what could be helpful in the context of the expertise I want to be known for, what could be helpful for my network to help them in their pursuits. My LinkedIn network does not need to know where I am traveling or what shoes I am wearing.
Really?
But I'm more than happy to share that with Instagram.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I want to hear what your thoughts are on personal branding, because we hear a lot about that today, and people are trying to perform something online because of that. Can you dive a little bit?
Okay, when I get the pen out of my eyeball.
Good. Okay, good. We're going in the right step first.
Yeah, I mean, I would just insert. It's like it just feels like everybody's performing now, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody's forced to perform and can't be a human being and can't just have a conversation.
Right. And, I mean, one of the questions I was asked on my book tour, and it was it was at NYU, and it was a public relations group, and it was a public student, and he said, how do you become an influencer? And my response was, you don't.
Exactly.
Because what it is it's like, for me, with the whole idea of brand, your brand is what your network, your community tells you it is.
Right.
And so that to me is, how are you behaving? Is there a community of people who knows what you do and how you can perform and what you deliver? Is there a community that thinks well of you, that they want to share what you do? So it all has to do with behavior, as opposed to getting the right font and, the kind of superficial kind of wrapping on what a brand is. So I'm much more concerned with, how do you show up every day? And do you show up every day in a way that is, I'm going to say, in some ways is consistent? Is it valuable? Valuable could be valuable to 5 people, let alone 500,000. And are you behaving in a way that, I want to say, that other people want to talk well of you and want to refer others to what it is that you do? And just as I'm answering this, I'm thinking of a non-human example. So Canadian living in the US, healthcare is not something I'm enamored with in this country, but I love my health insurer, which is really kind of weird. I love the way they communicate with me. I love the ease at which I can get information. I like that it is consistently clear and easy, whether it is the bill I get, the healthcare card, the fridge magnet they gave me, or their app. I love that their insurance and what is reimbursable is so understandable that my doctor and I can have a clear conversation about it. So,
it kind of, it sounds like it kind of goes down to expectations maybe, and exceeding those expectations. So like if your healthcare provider was trying to be your BFF and like be cutesy and do viral videos, you would probably be turned off by that. But they understand what you need from them because they've listened. Mm-hmm. And then they deliver that back. And it sounds like they do it like very well because they have taken that time to understand your needs and understand how you like to be communicated to.
Yeah, understanding the frustrations, understanding the lack of, clarity, understanding what it is that people want for them, and not trying to be, a whole bunch more with people, which kind of hitting on that. And I think there's kind of a lesson there in terms of, our human behavior. Like, what's sort of the clarity of giving information and understanding, like, what is it that your network, I mean, one of the things I often say to people is like, what is it that your network sees in you? Because in that you may find your secret sauce. I know that happened for me. But also you could have engagements with your network that you need to step back and say, hold on a minute. Why are they asking me for these things? Am I putting out the wrong message? So if I was still putting out a message all the time that, once you're a lawyer, you're always a lawyer. So if I was always putting out the message that I'm a lawyer, then I might be getting a lot of inquiries in that way that related to the legal world. And I haven't practiced law since 2002. So that would be the wrong messaging. The reason I say you got to listen, and what is it that, I want to say, whether it's your brand or whatever label you want to put on it. The reason I finally wrote a book on networking was I finally stopped and truly listened to what consistently my entire career, my network had asked me for. And they'd asked me for advice and guidance that I was just like, well, that's stupid. Doesn't everyone do it that way? Like, literally, that was my mindset on how I approach networking. So that whole idea of like your brand and what it is, part of it is, what's the energy, what's the activity you're putting out there in the world, but also, stop, more importantly, and take a breath and look around and say, all right, what's going on with my interactions with my community? And as a result of that, what's the possibilities that I have?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it reminds me of a mutual friend of ours, Nilofer Merchant's onlyness definition. Well, Nilofer, I'm excited to say, is going to be on the podcast hopefully soon. I think we're talking with her in a week or so. But yeah, that whole like realizing that you're not going to try to be somebody else. And I think that's probably part of the problem of what's, standing in as personal branding today, is that people look at what others are doing with success. So they'll say, I don't know, oh, they're making LinkedIn videos. Well, no, I have to make LinkedIn videos. And they try to do the same thing. And you see the same camera angle, you see the same subjects in their rants, even when they're not necessarily like natural or experts on that side.
Or needed. Right.
Yeah.
Or nobody asked for them. Right. And it's nobody asked you for this. You're just doing this for your own selfish reasons.
Yeah. Like everybody sees a Gary Vee and wants to be Gary Vee. Well, only one person can be Gary Vee. Thank goodness. We love Gary, but there's only so much Gary Vee you can do.
Yes.
Yeah. And so only one person can be Gary Vee, and that's Gary Vee. So be you. What is the Oscar Wilde quote? Something about like everybody.
Be yourself because everyone else is taken.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it is. There's an element of watching and seeing what others are doing, but that's just a data point. That's just like an observation. And, like when I think about, I'll go back to my own personal experience, when I was involved with 85 Broads, a lot of women, executive women I knew said to me, oh my God, I'm going to get involved with 85 Broads. Like, look what happened to you. Like, it was like this magic, pill,
right?
You just join 85 Broads and then this magical door opened and unicorns and rainbows and shamrocks and, four-leaf clovers and all sorts of other magic would come your way. And I was just like, whoa, hold on a minute here. Here's why I've had success. And here's the amount of time I've put in, and here's what I've done. I was doing this for other reasons, and got involved so deeply for, reasons that I'd already gotten the value. That I got this, extra value was, surprising to me and wonderful. And I'm indebted to Janet for that. But I looked at these women, and I'm like, just because you join doesn't mean this magic is going to happen. So just as, you've noted, just because you created a LinkedIn video doesn't mean that magic is going to happen like somebody else. You got to take those as data points and then assess it in your own very personal, unique position of what is your interactions and your relationship with your network. What is it that you want? What is it that they want from you? And boom, where's the magical point? But sort of following somebody else's roadmap, sort of without personalization, without customization, without thinking through all these unique points, it's just a recipe for disaster.
Huh, that sounds a lot like research.
Bingo. So that's what I mean. People always sort of, like, what's the secret to networking, Kelly? And my first flippant answer is don't be a jerk. But more importantly is, whether it's looking for a job, seeking out the next opportunity, working with finding new clients, or whatever else, this is where, spending time. And yes, doing the research is, I always like to quote, it's a great quote of Einstein's. Yeah, quoting Einstein when you're networking. I'm sure people think of that a lot. But there's a great quote of Einstein's where he says, someone asked him if he was given an hour to solve a problem, what would he do? And he said he would spend 55 minutes thinking about it and 5 minutes solving it. And for me, when people are going to go about networking, I wish they would do the same thing. I wish they would spend more time considering and being thoughtful than just flippantly, immediately, responding yes to an Eventbrite invitation or whatever it may be. People sort of think about filling up their calendar with stuff, or, oh my God, you have to get on Facebook, or, oh, you need a Twitter account. And, oh, no. If you're going to build your personal brand, you need this video, get a YouTube channel. I'm like, hold on a minute. Whoa. Like, take a big step back. And if you're going out there with sort of a particular goal in mind that you need your network to help you with, put in the time thinking about it first. I mean, we've spent time talking about reputation. We spent time talking about a network and community. So my trifecta, I like to think about the personal assets that we have in life. You have your reputation, which you can build and earn and lose and rebuild and all that. You have a network, which, as I've in my own life, I've moved across Canada, I've moved to the States, I've networks that come with me, I have new networks that I've built. So your networks, that's another thing that you can build and rebuild and all that. The third piece of the trifecta of your assets is time. And that's our most important asset. That's all any of us, have a finite amount of. It's non-renewable.
Yeah.
So use time wisely. Use your own time wisely, but also use other people's time wisely. So how you ask for someone's time, the time that you may spend, posting or attending events, like, ground it in some intelligence, not just, kind of foolhardily spending it because you think that's what other people did to be successful.
Yeah. So speaking of time, I'm always absolutely blown away by the fact that you seem to be so active on Twitter in particular, where you are engaging with other people's content, promoting other people's content. I don't think there's a single post that I've put up where, I've talked about something I'm, working on or whatever, that you don't at least if not comment on. Is that where you've decided to spend your time because it's valuable, or is it just a distraction for you?
It's a valuable way for me to stay in touch and on top of a lot, I want to say, of close relationships in my community who don't happen to be where I am. And so it is important to me, that one, for those things. It's also why I follow fewer number of people than follow me. Things that I find that are going to be distractions, I put in lists, and I can observe them over there. I've watched and observed and understand how I take in information, and I've tried different tools in terms of kind of having the inputs from social media. And for me, the very clean screen feed of Twitter on Twitter is the input I need. Anything else, a tweet deck with a bunch of different channels, So I was almost like when I was in your offices recently, and you had like the tweet deck up. I was sort of like, oh, maybe I should look at it again. And then I was like, no, that's information overload for me. That will get into me being messy and distracted and not productive. But part of it is for me is how can I stay in touch with people who are all around the globe. And that's why I do it that way. And that's also why I like to follow very few people so that I can see that most important priority community in that very easy stream. Do I miss things? Yes, but we're human, and that's the result of it. It's also why for me, like when I think about and watching my network, when I think about other platforms, and the other one I use, probably to the highest value is LinkedIn. My community is on that platform in terms of just looking for things, highly, I would say their high activity is probably first thing in the morning. So for me, being on LinkedIn other than once a day, and in terms of seeing what's up with people, being on LinkedIn more than once a day in terms of posting doesn't produce higher value. It does produce value during the day if I need to go and do research and find things, but that's a different use of that platform. If I'm there to be active in connecting with people, that's once a day. And that's not a lot of time, like who doesn't have 5 or 10 minutes to do that?
Do you just like, it's like going through your email in the morning, you also add LinkedIn to that list? And
Well, when people like ask, and you guys get this all the time, hey, can I pick your brain for 15 minutes over coffee? Let's all admit it. There's no such thing as a 15-minute coffee. There's no such thing, right? Such thing. But where could you pick someone's brain for 15 minutes? Probably on a LinkedIn update or a LinkedIn post. Yeah. Spend 15 minutes studying someone there, and you can probably get a lot of insights before you, really email them and ask them the right question. So it's not a big time investment, and it has a big impact in terms of staying on top of my network. I also don't think on that platform people want, stuff that's all over the place all the time. Right. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know with my network, this is the behavior they want from me, and based on how I've watched and observed their behavior.
So how do you balance authentic with, making sure that you're also behaving in a way that people want you to behave? So like that whole do you keep things off of social? What is your thought on?
Yeah, there's things I keep off social, and I think about the same way that I, keep it out of. I'm going to keep it out of my in real life relationships as well. There's some things my attitude is it's nobody's business.
Right.
And I don't feel the need to put it there. My ex was not on social, so I very much kept him off of it and out of that conversation because that wasn't his place to be. And he didn't want that. So I was like, all right, I need to respect and honor that. But there's also, I think there's pieces of ourselves that we share with limited groups of people. So it doesn't need there to be for public consumption. I keep that in mind. I think keep it in mind based on either geography or age with people who are important in my life. One of the original reasons I went on Facebook was because my nephews were there. My nephews aren't there anymore.
Right.
But also, too, I respect and honor the way that they interact with the world. And so that's the way I communicate with them. And, if they want to publicly, be out there and acknowledging, that's great. It's why if I'm with somebody and, they have kids, I would never post that picture on social. So, I say in so many ways, it's so funny to say this as an author who's out there to sell books. I'm not in it for the likes.
Right.
Right. I'm in it for where's the value? And if you find, like I said, if you provide value to one person.
So you're in it for the value, but the value that you can provide your network.
Yeah. And my value that I can provide is based on what is valuable to my network, which is sort of like which is first, the horse or the cart, but they have to work together. And some of the things that, some of the things that I put out there that I think are going to, you test things to see whether or not you think it would be valuable. And sometimes it comes back, in interesting ways on what people would want. Like the whole idea of writing a book. And when I reached out to people and said I wanted to write a book, and my network came back to me and they were like, "Oh, thank God, we've been wanting you to do that." And I'm like, really? Really? But,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that all of it, just, everything that you say reminds me of like the story that I heard and I really love. And I think it's the best tip I ever received was, if you go into a situation where you don't know anyone and you're nervous and anxious, you just start asking them about themselves, getting them, be curious about them. So whether it's online or offline in any situation, and that really is like a good way to start to, well, it's research, it's listening. It's also rapport building at the end of the day. And it's just so super valuable.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, it's always been about sort of like whenever I started following anybody, somebody that I didn't know, obviously it is, I always sort of, I'm a quiet person, as anybody who's listened to this podcast knows, but, with time, I've sort of realized that whenever I connect with somebody new, I tend to just, sit back and just watch them do their thing, and then start chiming in on once in a while, and then, sort of figure out, okay, this is what they're about. And, this aligns with what I want to talk about as well. So I'll jump in instead of like, automatically jumping into, and adding a pointless comment that, the thing is, at the end of the day, these platforms, they allow us to be quick, right? They don't, when you think about, like, we talk about the days of like sending a fax or sending a letter. Well, that took
paper.
effort. That took a real sort of like real effort. Now you've made, these platforms they practically message people for you, right? They'll like, nudge you to say, hey, so say hi to someone, so-and-so, right? So they've taken all that effort away, and the thought process of learning what that person is about and what they're really interested in. So it takes time to just sit back and figure that out.
Yeah.
Well, it's inserting the pause. Like you said, like you noted. I mean, used to send, a letter to a pen pal, and that, things that took time and that thoughtfulness. And there is a value in inserting a pause. And I'm reminded that every so often because of traveling and being, time zones away from a core network. All of a sudden you've had that distance, that time puts in a pause for you to have a much more reflective answer or reaction. And so I think that idea of to say to people, like, insert the pause. I want to hit on something that Tara had said. One of those things when I say to people, when they say they're standing in a room, and that room could be a physical room or it could be Twitter, and they don't know what to do. I always go back to them and say, well, ask why you're there in the first place. Why did you make that decision? And what does it relate to? Because I think the time where we get anxious and tongue-tied and squirm is when we don't know why we're doing something. And so every action, I think, has to be grounded in that understanding. And some of that comes from research, and some of that comes from your own personal goal setting and analysis. So again, back to research, what's your goal? What's your purpose? What are you trying to achieve? And who are the people who can help you? So that determines why you're in, a particular room. And then absolutely, as you noted, Carlos, I mean, the most important tool you have in this world of networking, like world of advertising or marketing or whatever else, is your goddamn ears. And like, why people are worried about what's their elevator pitch and what are they going to say? I'm like, how are you going to hear? How are you going to listen? If you're worried about what you're going to say, it means you're not listening. Because if you listen, you'll know, right? What's something to ask someone? And I'm sort of thinking about it and having a chuckle in my head, because there was one time at a law firm event, and no one was talking to the client. So I went to speak with the client, the big client who was in the room. And by the time the relationship partner came around and kind of joined our conversation, I think he was a bit horrified. We were discussing gardening and guns.
I would love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation and how those are connected.
Oh my God, it was hilarious. Who thought it was like, yeah, the Canadian and the tax attorney walk into a room and discuss gardening and guns. It's like, punchline and a joke, but yeah, it was hilarious.
Yeah, that is so funny. So on that note, and because, this podcast is all about unpacking what goes into a strategy, what would your advice be? Like, what would the way that you would approach us? Somebody's just standing there, an individual or a small business, and they want to find a way to get known. What is that first piece of the building that strategy look like?
So their networking strategy. I always need to understand what their goal and what their purpose is, and really hyper specific. I need to understand the networking choices and decisions they're making now and the interactions that they're already having, kind of with the world, on what their expectations are. And from then to kind of say, hey, here's what I would do, or here's where I see there's opportunities. I'm thinking of a client I worked with recently. There was an idea for another line of business. And I needed to understand with their existing line of business, how they were getting their work, the ways that those were coming in, and then with them sort of devising how this new line of business, like whether or not they should pursue it, and if they should, what the game plan was. It was also a way of working with this client to be able to say to them, oh, but they were sort of like, well, this is how we get business. I'm okay. And I'm like, good, this project falls within that activity. This one falls within that activity. This other thing falls within that activity. Right. And they said, but we also love to do this. And I'm like, where does that feed into any of this? I'm glad you love to do this, but you've also told me this other factor is you don't have time because you need the time to do these three things. This fourth thing doesn't feed anything other than your soul, which is great, but let's find another way for you to have your, you need that. You need your soul nurtured, but let's find another way to do that because you've already given me these other priorities. So I really need to understand where they are right now to be able to say to them, here's what you go and do, which is probably why I have such a pet peeve with a lot of networking advice out there. Because a lot of the time they give you the tactics. Yeah. Join this club.
Hustle.
Get on LinkedIn. Like the stuff you guys hear from people. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, no. If you don't know what your goal is, if you don't factor in your existing behaviors, then any tactic, is just, it could be a time waste or it could be a success. And it would be absolutely random as opposed to grounded in a strategy and research, which then would make it valuable.
Well, that is incredible advice. Sounds like you're on fire over there.
No. It sounds like if there was in any doubt of where Kelly Hoey is right now.
New York City.
She is in New York City.
It's very New York background noise. Awesome.
With all my travels, I like to remind people that I do have a home and a mailing address in New York, and there's confirmation.
There you go. Absolutely. So,
tell us where people should follow you or connect with you or reach out to you.
Well, easiest is through my website, which has all my social handles and also a contact form that comes directly to my inbox, and that is jkellyhoey.co. So jkellyhoey.co. And since, as Tara's already noted, I'm on Twitter quite frequently. So @jkhoey on Twitter is a good place to find me too.
Absolutely. Well, I love your Twitter feed, love the conversations. I meet a lot of people actually through the people that you conversate with on Twitter. It's amazing you know how you are able to connect people. So definitely follow Kelly. Say hi to her too, because she's a very good person to know. Obviously, she not only is a super connector, but she wrote the book on how to do this yourself. So super valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks for having me.
And we look forward to applying a lot of these lessons to our own lives.
Awesome. If you're still listening, thank you very much for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed the show, if you enjoyed the series, please share it with a colleague, a friend that would enjoy it as well.
We're having many more conversations like this coming up with all sorts of interesting people who think about strategy from their own unique perspective. People like Nilofer Merchant, who talks about finding your ownliness. People like Brian Solis, who is actually talking about stepping back and away from this public social lifestyle and thinking more intentional about his day-to-day. So definitely subscribe on iTunes.
Apple Podcasts.
Oh, Apple Podcasts.
Or whatever podcast player you use. Thank you.
Thank you.